What if the reason you struggle to make friends isn't because something is wrong with you, but because your mind works differently from most people around you? Sounds arrogant at first, right? That's exactly what society wants you to believe. From childhood, people are taught that being alone means failure, awkwardness, or weakness. But psychology tells a much deeper story, one that most people never hear because it challenges everything modern society rewards. The truth is, some individuals naturally distance themselves from shallow environments because their level of self-awareness becomes too high to tolerate constant emotional performance. And here's the strange paradox nobody talks about. The more authenticity a person develops, the harder it often becomes for them to fit into ordinary social circles. They stop laughing at fake conversations, stop chasing validation, and slowly begin noticing hidden patterns in human behavior that others completely ignore. Suddenly, crowded rooms feel empty, surface-level friendships feel exhausting, and solitude starts feeling more peaceful than forced connection. That's not weakness. In many cases, it's the beginning of transformation. Machiavelli once implied that people fear those they cannot easily manipulate. Think about that carefully. A person who doesn't desperately need approval becomes difficult to control, difficult to predict, and sometimes even difficult to understand. That's why highly independent individuals are often labeled cold, antisocial, or too intense, when in reality, they simply refuse to betray themselves for acceptance. And honestly, that scares people more than they'd ever admit openly. But here's the good news. If you've always felt different, disconnected, or strangely out of place in social environments, there's a strong chance you possess rare psychological traits most people never develop. Traits linked to independence, emotional depth, pattern recognition, and internal strength. In this video, you're going to discover the 7 unique characteristics commonly found in people who walk alone, and by the end, you may finally understand why you never truly fit into the crowd in the first place. Most people grow up believing that being alone is some kind of failure, like life handed them the wrong script and forgot the happy crowd scenes. But the strange thing is that some individuals never truly felt comfortable inside noisy groups. Even when they tried their best to fit in, they laugh at the right moments, show up to parties, answer messages, and still walk away feeling emotionally disconnected. Psychology has a name for this kind of internal mismatch, but most people simply call it being weird. What nobody explains is that solitude often begins as a defense mechanism, not a choice made out of arrogance. A mind that notices too much eventually becomes careful about where it places its energy. And honestly, that realization changes the way someone starts looking at human connection altogether. There's an old idea inspired by Machiavelli that says crowds reward similarity more than truth. And once a person notices that, social life starts feeling different. Some people can sit in a room full of friends and still feel lonely because the conversations never go deeper than appearances. They hear everyone talking, but very little is actually being said. That's why highly self-aware individuals often retreat into silence for periods of time without fully understanding why. It's not hatred toward people. It's exhaustion from pretending to enjoy superficial exchanges that drain the mind. Think about the tiger for a second. It doesn't travel alone because it's weak. It walks alone because its nature was designed for independence, precision, and awareness. And little by little, certain people begin realizing they operate the same way. Society tends to panic whenever someone enjoys being alone too much. The moment a person stops chasing validation, others immediately assume something must be wrong with them. Why doesn't he go out more? Why is she always by herself? Funny enough, nobody asks whether constant social noise is actually healthy in the first place. A person who spends time alone usually begins developing a sharper form of self-awareness because silence reveals things distraction hides. During solitude, patterns become easier to notice, intentions become clearer, and emotional manipulation loses power. That's why some individuals start protecting their peace, almost like it's treasure. Once someone experiences mental clarity without constant interference, returning to shallow environments feels strangely difficult. A mentor once explained this using a simple analogy that stuck with people for years. He said the average mind fears silence because silence acts like a mirror, and mirrors reveal truths many aren't ready to face. That's why endless scrolling, crowded schedules, and fake social rituals became so addictive in modern life. They help people avoid confronting themselves. But individuals going through real transformation eventually become comfortable sitting alone with their thoughts for long periods. At first, it feels uncomfortable, almost like emotional detox. Then something unexpected happens. The loneliness slowly transforms into understanding, and that's usually the moment a person begins seeing the world differently from everyone around them. One young man once shared that he stopped forcing himself into groups after noticing he always returned home emotionally exhausted. He wasn't shy, antisocial, or bitter. He simply realized he spent most conversations pretending to care about things that meant nothing to him. So instead, he started spending evenings reading, building skills, walking alone, and studying human behavior through the lens of psychology. Oddly enough, the more comfortable he became with solitude, the more authenticity appeared in his personality. He no longer laughed just to be accepted or agreed just to avoid conflict, and people around him started reacting differently to that quiet confidence. Some admired it, while others clearly felt uncomfortable, which opens an interesting door into the next idea. The truth is, independent minds often scare people without even trying, not because they are superior, but because they are difficult to predict and even harder to control. A person who genuinely enjoys their own company cannot be manipulated with the usual social rewards and punishments. They stop chasing approval, and suddenly, the rules everyone else follows begin losing influence over them. That's where the real paradox begins. The same world that tells people to be themselves often rejects anyone who actually does it. And once someone starts noticing these hidden dynamics, they begin understanding why certain rare personalities naturally drift away from the crowd without even planning to. There's a reason some people feel mentally exhausted after spending only a few minutes in certain environments. Their minds process details most individuals completely ignore. A small change in tone, a forced smile, an awkward pause between words, all of it gets noticed almost instantly. Psychology often associates this with hyperacute pattern recognition, but in everyday life, it simply makes social interactions feel heavier than they should. While others enjoy surface-level conversations without thinking twice, these individuals subconsciously analyze contradictions, intentions, and emotional inconsistencies. It's like having a mental radar that never truly turns off, and over time, that constant awareness changes the way someone relates to people around them. One of the rarest traits in highly independent individuals is their intolerance for fake behavior. They may stay quiet during conversations, but internally they notice when someone changes personalities depending on who enters the room. They notice forced kindness, strategic compliments, and hidden competition disguised as friendship. That doesn't mean they believe everyone is malicious. Far from it. It simply means their self-awareness becomes so sharp that pretending starts feeling emotionally expensive. Machiavelli once implied that people wear masks to survive socially and honestly. Modern life proves that idea almost daily. The problem is that certain personalities struggle to ignore those masks once they've learned how to recognize them. And after that, ordinary social life begins feeling strangely artificial. Another common characteristic is the deep discomfort with shallow conversations. Small talk isn't evil, of course, but some people feel emotionally trapped when every interaction revolves around gossip, appearances, or meaningless repetition. They crave conversations that challenge the mind, reveal hidden perspectives, or expose uncomfortable truths about life. That's why they often connect faster with books, ideas, or creative projects than with random social gatherings. A person like this can spend 3 hours discussing human behavior, transformation, or authenticity without getting bored once. Yet 10 minutes of forced conversation at a loud dinner table might completely drain their energy. Funny enough, others sometimes mistake that exhaustion for arrogance, when in reality, it's simply mental incompatibility. Independent thinkers also tend to resist social conformity in subtle ways. They question traditions people follow automatically and often ask uncomfortable questions nobody wants to answer honestly. Why do people fake friendships they secretly dislike? Why do so many follow trends they don't even enjoy? Why does society reward appearances more than substance? These questions may sound simple, but they quietly separate observers from followers. The average person seeks belonging first and truth second, while highly self-aware individuals usually reverse that order. That's exactly why solitude becomes more common in their lives. Once someone values truth over acceptance, their social circle naturally becomes smaller, but also far more meaningful. A practical example of this appears in workplace dynamics all the time. Imagine a person sitting quietly during a meeting, while everyone enthusiastically agrees with a terrible idea. Most people stay silent out of fear of rejection, but independent minds often feel an internal resistance they can't ignore. Even when speaking up creates tension, they struggle to betray their own logic just to preserve comfort. That inner independence becomes both a strength and a social burden. Some coworkers admire their courage, while others quietly label them difficult or antisocial. In reality, they simply prioritize internal alignment over external approval. And believe it or not, that difference completely changes how someone experiences the modern world. What makes this even more fascinating is that these traits rarely appear separately. Strong pattern recognition often comes with emotional depth. Authenticity usually walks side by side with discomfort towards superficiality. And intense independence frequently creates distance from social norms people follow without questioning. Slowly, these individuals begin understanding they were never truly designed for constant crowd validation in the first place. But that realization also creates tension, because society doesn't always celebrate individuality the way motivational speeches pretend it does. In fact, the more someone thinks independently, the more friction they often experience with the invisible rules governing social life. Before we continue, pay close attention to this. If what you've heard so far feels painfully accurate, if you've spent years feeling ignored, underestimated, or invisible in social situations, there's a reason for that. And more importantly, there's a way to change it. I created an ebook called The Silent Influence Code: How to Make People Respect, Desire, and Follow You Without Saying a Word. Inside, you'll discover the hidden psychological triggers high-status men use to command attention, build attraction, and influence people naturally without forcing anything. If topics 1 and 2 opened your eyes to how human behavior really works, this will take it to another level. The link is in the pinned comment. And trust me, once you understand these dynamics, you'll never see social interactions the same way again. Most social groups operate through invisible rules nobody openly explains, yet everyone somehow understands. Laugh at the right jokes, agree at the right moments, avoid questioning the wrong people, and everything flows smoothly. But independent minds usually struggle with these unspoken contracts because they instinctively prioritize logic over social performance. They don't rebel just for attention. They simply feel uncomfortable pretending agreement when something clearly makes no sense. And honestly, that tiny difference changes everything. Psychology shows that groups often protect emotional comfort more fiercely than truth itself. That's why a person who asks difficult questions can create more tension than someone who openly lies. Strange world, isn't it? The problem begins when society interprets independence as arrogance. A person who enjoys solitude, thinks critically, and doesn't constantly seek approval quickly becomes difficult to categorize. Some people admire them at first, but others feel strangely threatened by their refusal to conform. After all, someone who cannot be easily influenced quietly disrupts the emotional balance of many groups. Machiavelli understood this dynamic centuries ago when he described how power structures rely heavily on obedience and perception. Modern society may look different on the surface, but emotionally, many systems still reward compliance over authenticity. And the moment someone steps outside those expectations, labels begin appearing almost automatically. He thinks he's better than everyone. She's too difficult. He never joins anything. Funny enough, those phrases are often directed at people who simply value peace more than performance. The average person assumes social participation equals emotional health, but that assumption isn't always true. Some individuals leave gatherings feeling emptier than before because their minds crave depth, honesty, and meaningful connection instead of endless performance rituals. They don't reject people entirely. They reject emotional dishonesty. That distinction matters more than most realize. And once someone understands this internally, they stop feeling guilty for protecting their energy from environments that constantly demand masks. A mentor once shared a brutal observation that made people uncomfortable for weeks. He said many social environments function less like communities and more like silent negotiations for status, validation, and control. At first, that idea sounds cynical, but then real life starts proving it piece by piece. Watch how quickly people change opinions when authority enters the room. Watch how often honesty disappears the moment social approval becomes threatened. Highly self-aware individuals notice these shifts almost instantly, which explains why large groups often feel emotionally exhausting to them. Their minds are constantly reading hidden tensions beneath the surface conversation. And over time, that awareness naturally pushes them further toward independence and selective connection. This conflict becomes even stronger in the digital age. Social media created a strange culture where people are rewarded for visibility more than substance. Everyone is encouraged to share opinions constantly, but very few stop to develop real inner clarity before speaking. Independent thinkers usually sense this contradiction early, which is why many eventually detach from the endless race for validation online. Instead of chasing attention, they focus on building internal strength, knowledge, and transformation behind closed doors. Ironically, society often overlooks these quiet individuals at first. Yet history repeatedly shows that the people who shape the world are rarely the loudest ones in the room. The deeper someone moves into authenticity, the more they realize individuality comes with a social cost few are willing to discuss openly. Freedom sounds beautiful in theory, but in practice, it often means walking away from environments that reward conformity. It means accepting misunderstandings without constantly explaining yourself. It means learning how to navigate society strategically without becoming consumed by it. And somewhere inside that tension, a powerful realization begins forming. Maybe solitude was never the real problem. Maybe the real challenge is learning how to remain fully yourself in a world constantly asking you to become someone easier to control. At some point, highly driven people begin understanding a truth that most motivational quotes conveniently ignore. Building something meaningful usually requires periods of isolation, not punishment, not sadness, isolation with purpose. The world loves celebrating success publicly, but very few talk about the long nights spent alone, learning, failing, rebuilding, and questioning everything internally. Psychology shows that deep concentration demands mental space, yet modern life constantly pushes distraction as if busyness were a badge of honor. That's why many people remain active, but never truly evolve. Real transformation often begins the moment someone becomes comfortable disappearing for a while, to focus on becoming stronger. There's a mindset some mentors call the architect mentality. An architect doesn't obsess over applause while laying foundations, because the real work happens before anyone notices the result. Independent individuals frequently operate the same way. While others chase visibility, they quietly build skills, discipline, emotional control, and self-awareness behind closed doors. To outsiders, it may look like loneliness or social withdrawal, but internally, something entirely different is happening. They're redesigning their identity piece by piece. And honestly, that process can feel uncomfortable because growth rarely looks glamorous while it's happening. Think about a caterpillar for a second. Before becoming a butterfly, it enters complete isolation inside a cocoon where its old structure literally dissolves. Nature itself understands that transformation requires separation from familiar environments for a period of time. Yet humans panic the moment life becomes quiet. They assume stillness means failure instead of preparation. Machiavelli understood something similar when discussing power and strategy. Those who constantly seek approval rarely develop real inner strength. A person obsessed with external validation usually abandons long-term growth the moment discomfort appears. But individuals who embrace solitude strategically develop resilience most people never fully acquire. A practical example appears in almost every meaningful craft. Writers disappear to think deeply. Athletes train alone before sunrise, while everyone else sleeps. Entrepreneurs spend years building ideas nobody believes in yet. Even emotionally mature people often retreat temporarily to rebuild their minds after painful experiences. One man once described this phase perfectly when he said, "The loneliest years of my life built the strongest version of me." And honestly, many people secretly know that feeling. The moments that shape identity most profoundly usually happen far away from applause, noise, and social approval. What makes this process difficult is that society often misunderstands intentional isolation. Friends may assume someone is becoming cold, distant, or antisocial when in reality they are simply prioritizing growth over distraction. Authenticity becomes stronger during these seasons because solitude removes the pressure to constantly perform for others. A person alone long enough eventually discovers what they genuinely enjoy, believe, and value without external interference shaping every decision. That level of self-awareness changes the way they approach relationships, work, and even daily routines. Suddenly, they stop living reactively and begin acting with deliberate intention instead. Still, there's another side to this kind of independence that few people talk about, honestly. The stronger someone becomes internally, the less dependent they are on approval, validation, or emotional reassurance from others. At first, that sounds empowering, and it is, but it also changes social dynamics in unexpected ways. People who cannot be emotionally controlled often create silent discomfort around those who rely heavily on manipulation, validation, or group influence. And that's where solitude stops being just a phase of growth and starts becoming a form of psychological power most people never learn how to handle properly. One of the most intimidating things in the world isn't aggression, intelligence, or even status. It's a person who no longer needs constant approval to feel valuable. Society rarely says this out loud, but many relationships quietly depend on emotional dependency to function. The moment someone becomes deeply self-aware and emotionally independent, the usual methods of control begin losing effect. Guilt stops working the same way. Social pressure weakens. Manipulation becomes easier to detect, and suddenly, people around them start reacting differently without fully understanding why. Psychology explains this clearly. Individuals who generate purpose internally become extremely difficult to influence externally. There's a concept known as the autotelic personality, which describes people who find meaning within themselves rather than relying heavily on external rewards. These individuals don't need applause to continue improving. They can spend months mastering a skill nobody notices because the satisfaction comes from growth itself. Honestly, that mindset feels almost foreign in a world addicted to visibility and validation. While most people seek attention before effort, self-sufficient individuals reverse the equation completely. They focus on becoming excellent first and let recognition arrive later, if it arrives at all. And over time, that quiet independence creates a level of psychological stability many secretly envy. Machiavelli hinted at something fascinating centuries ago. The hardest person to manipulate is the one who has learned to control their own desires. Modern life proves this every single day. Companies manipulate insecurity to sell identity. Social groups manipulate fear to maintain conformity. Even relationships sometimes rely on emotional imbalance to preserve control. But a person grounded in authenticity becomes resistant to these pressures because they no longer depend entirely on external validation to define themselves. That doesn't make them emotionless. It makes them internally anchored. And once someone reaches that point, they begin moving through the world with a completely different energy. A practical example of this appears when someone finally learns how to enjoy their own company. At first, weekends alone may feel uncomfortable because society conditioned people to associate solitude with failure. But then something shifts. They start reading more, building healthier routines, learning new skills, exploring ideas, and reconnecting with themselves without constant distraction. Instead of feeling abandoned, they begin feeling free. One woman once explained it perfectly when she said, "I stopped chasing people the moment I realized peace felt better than forced connection." That sentence sounds simple, but it carries an enormous level of self-awareness most people never fully develop. Of course, there's a hidden danger in extreme self-sufficiency, too. Some individuals become so protective of their peace that they accidentally isolate themselves from meaningful relationships entirely. Independence is powerful, but humans still need genuine connection, trust, and emotional support from time to time. The goal isn't to become emotionally unreachable like some cold strategist from a movie. Real transformation happens when someone learns how to maintain strong boundaries without losing their humanity in the process. In other words, wisdom is knowing how to stand alone without forgetting how to connect when connection is real. That balance becomes increasingly important because the modern world constantly confuses attachment with love and attention with value. Self-aware individuals eventually realize they don't need to shrink themselves just to remain accepted by people who misunderstand their nature. Yet they also begin understanding that strategic connection matters too. Solitude builds strength, but wisdom teaches where that strength should be invested. And once a person truly masters that balance between independence and human connection, they start approaching life less like a lonely outsider and more like someone preparing for a much larger purpose ahead. One of the biggest mistakes people make is lowering their standards simply because loneliness becomes uncomfortable. They tolerate fake friendships, shallow environments, and emotionally draining relationships just to avoid being alone with their own thoughts. But over time, that choice creates something even worse than solitude: disconnection from oneself. Highly self-aware individuals eventually realize that peace has a price, and sometimes that price is temporary isolation. Psychology teaches that environments shape identity more than most people notice. So when someone constantly surrounds themselves with negativity, superficiality, or manipulation, their inner clarity slowly begins fading too. And honestly, many people don't even realize it's happening until they feel completely lost. That's why solitude should never be treated as a permanent prison or a tragic curse. It should be viewed as a training phase, a period where someone sharpens their mind, strengthens their character, and reconnects with authenticity without external noise interfering every 5 minutes. Think about every meaningful transformation story people admire. The hero almost always spends time alone before returning stronger. Not because isolation itself is magical, but because silence forces growth in ways comfort never can. A distracted mind rarely evolves deeply, but a focused mind, even during difficult seasons, can completely redesign the direction of an entire life. One mentor used to say something that sounded harsh at first, but turned out painfully true. If you don't learn to enjoy your own company, you'll spend your life accepting connections that damage your spirit. That sentence changes people once they truly understand it. Independence isn't about rejecting humanity. It's about refusing to abandon yourself for temporary approval. Machiavelli understood that power begins internally long before it appears externally. And in modern life, emotional discipline may be one of the rarest forms of power left. A person who can remain grounded without constant validation becomes almost impossible to emotionally destabilize. There's also something important many people overlook. Solitude gives individuals the opportunity to become excellent at something meaningful. Instead of obsessing over being liked, they begin developing skills, knowledge, emotional intelligence, and deep self. One person may learn communication, another may master business, art, fitness, writing, or leadership. Slowly, purpose replaces insecurity, and strangely enough, the more someone focuses on becoming valuable internally, the less desperate they become for external attention. That's usually when real confidence appears. Not loud confidence built for display, but quiet certainty built through experience and discipline. Still, navigating society strategically matters too. Completely disconnecting from the world isn't wisdom, it's avoidance. The goal is learning how to interact without losing authenticity in the process. Independent minds often thrive once they stop expecting deep connection from every person they meet. Some relationships are meant for laughter, others are meant for growth. A rare few are meant for genuine loyalty and understanding. Once someone accepts this, social life becomes less emotionally exhausting. They stop forcing impossible expectations onto casual connections and start protecting their energy with greater intelligence and balance. At the end of the day, loneliness isn't always proof that something is wrong with a person. Sometimes it's evidence that their mind no longer fits comfortably inside environments built on conformity, distraction, and superficial validation. The real challenge is not returning to the crowd just to feel temporarily accepted again. The real challenge is becoming strong enough to carry your individuality without apology. Because eventually, the people who embrace solitude wisely discover something most never fully experience: freedom, clarity, and the quiet power that comes from finally becoming who they were always meant to be. Now the real question is this: are you going to continue shrinking yourself just to feel temporarily accepted? Or are you finally going to embrace the person you were becoming all along? Because the truth is, most people spend their entire lives running away from solitude without realizing that some of the greatest forms of transformation are born inside silence. The world will always try to convince you that fitting in matters more than authenticity. But deep down, you already know that constantly betraying yourself comes with a price too high to pay. Maybe your loneliness was never proof that you were broken. Maybe it was life forcing you to develop self-awareness, emotional strength, and independence before stepping into a bigger purpose. And honestly, that changes everything. The moment a person stops begging for validation, they begin seeing the world with completely different eyes. Manipulation becomes visible. Fake relationships lose their appeal. And peace starts feeling more valuable than attention. So take a moment and ask yourself something seriously. How many times did you stay in the wrong environments just to avoid being alone? How many times did you silence your real personality to make others comfortable? And who could you become if you finally stopped apologizing for thinking differently? Remember this carefully. Solitude is dangerous only when a person wastes it. But when used wisely, it becomes one of the greatest tools for growth, clarity, and psychological freedom a human being can experience. The people who master themselves eventually stop fearing isolation because they understand their value no longer depends on the crowd. If this video spoke directly to you, let that be a sign that you're not alone in this journey. Leave a comment below and share which of these traits describes you the most. I really want to hear your perspective. And if you want to continue learning about psychology, human behavior, authenticity, and the hidden dynamics that shape powerful minds, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications so you never miss the next video.